International Media TV, television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special evening honoring the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Struggle of 1963. This is part of the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris lecture series. Promises to be a fabulous evening. I'm Isabel Duran, formerly of Channel 4, and your moderator for this evening, now retired. And I have notes in case I have some of those senior moments. We have a wonderful, I dare say, emotional evening planned. And I'm pleased to be here with you, and some very special guests who in their young lives were in the center of the cauldron that was the civil rights era. And we'll hear from them in the next hour. We begin this evening with a welcome and some thoughts for you from Oakland's mayor, from this institution's president. You can hang on there for a minute. Wait till you hear the name. I want you to be anxious a little bit longer. And from a young woman who benefits by being a part of the Martin Luther King Freedom programs. We also have 4 very special guests with us tonight. One, a young child, the other, all teens at the time their fathers were making history in 1963. They might say in their moment of truth that it was both a blessing and a curse to be that daughter. Luci Baines Johnson Turpin, the daughter of the president who took office under tragic circumstances and pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But Luci Baines was fomenting her own rebellion in that time, converting from Episcopalian to Catholicism and raising protests from the Episcopalian leadership, perhaps demonstrating, like her own father, that she was not afraid to take on unpopular positions. Also joining us tonight, Carrie Kennedy, a bare 4 years old at the time, the product of a prominent family in American politics and government, whose father, then U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was a prominent civil rights supporter. She now carries the torch against injustice to the international stage as a human rights advocate. Peggy Wallace Kennedy was also on the front lines of history, a 13-year-old in 1963, when her father, Governor George Wallace of Alabama, blocked the doors of the University of Alabama to 2 black students, a scene that is etched in memory, a painful memory for Peggy Wallace, who knew a different man, and in recent years has found and uses her own voice to promote racial healing. And finally, there's Donzella Abernathy, the youngest daughter of the Reverend Ralph David Abernathy. She was born and raised in the public forefront of the civil rights movement. She's a beautiful and successful actress and author, but never forgets the lessons of social injustice her father battled, using her platform to work in environmental, AIDS, and educational causes. So let me ask you, where were you all in 1963? From the look of some of you in the audience, you were not even a gleam in your papa's eye. But then there were the rest of us. I, who am now one of those so-called baby boomers, was a teenager in high school, watching from afar, growing up in the agricultural-rich Salinas Valley, a yet uninformed, even unformed Mexican-American, but aware that somehow there was a difference between me, the brown kid, and most of the white kids in the Catholic schools that we Durans went to. I could count on 2 hands the number of Mexican and African American kids who went to our private schools. We were sitting in a classroom when word came down of the assassination of President Kennedy in November of 1963, and we mourned with the rest of the country for 3 days. But little was done to interpret for us the unrest roiling in the country, the civil rights struggle, the March on Washington that had just occurred. And as I witnessed some of the conditions for the then legal guest workers known as braceros, who labored in the fields, I was more aware of the bias and unequal treatment against Mexicans right there in the lettuce fields of Salinas. That was my introduction to racism and to social injustice. It raised my awareness about being the only Latina in the room, in the journalism department at college, in the newsroom, at the negotiating and policy development tables, even today. I had thought civil rights, except for the farm labor movement, was late to arrive for Latinos, those who were native to this country, and for those who came here for a better life. The conversation was black and white. But while Dr. Martin Luther King and farm labor leader Cesar Chavez walked different paths those 50 years ago, there has been a convergence of politics and purpose in the conversation today, from politicians to faith-based, from labor leaders to education and social movement causes. Latinos have sorted out their own issues, developed their own leaders, and found their own voice in this 50 years of struggle. We have seen these struggles bear fruit, and our next speaker is one that, as a result of that Latina leadership, was able to battle and create equal opportunity for educational opportunity for Latinos. And so I invite the president of Marriott College and co-producer of this series, Dr. Norma Ambriz Galaviz, respected for her advocacy and collaborative approaches with an eye to change and excellence. She was chosen less than a year ago to assume the reins of leadership at this College of Merit. Dr. Ambriz Galaviz certainly understands the battles for equality. She represents one of just 102 Latino college presidents of 2- and 4-year institutions of the over 3,500 colleges and universities in this country, less than a fraction of 1%. Still a battle after 50 years. The achievement even more telling when you learn that only 5.2% of Latinos earn a doctorate in education. The numbers are about equal in the African American community, which also makes up less than 1% of college presidents. Let me ask Dr. President Norma Ambriz Galaviz to step forward, please.
Good evening. As you just heard, my name is Norma Ambriz Galaviz, President of Marriott College, of the Peralta Community Colleges. And on behalf of our district and our Board of Trustees, our Chancellor Jose Dr. Ortiz, and our trustees who are present here. I have 2 trustees that have joined us here. If they care to stand, Trustee Brown, Trustee Handy, if you could stand, please. I welcome here tonight not only the entire community, our students, our elected officials, but our distinguished panel of guests that we are so honored to have. Truly, this is a special event for not only Marriott College, but for the Martin Luther King Freedom Center. We are so proud to be able to offer through the Barbara Lee and L.U. Harris lecture series this special opportunity that I think will also be a defining year for us in listening to the 4 remarkable daughters of 5 decades ago, in which history was made and continues to be made, especially here in Alameda County in Oakland, California. So again, welcome, and we look forward to listening to our distinguished guests. Thank you.
Thank you. We are here tonight remembering and honoring a past that has made both positive change and at the same time continues to leave great gaps in equal opportunities. But this young woman at the young age of 15 was quoted in the Oakland Tribune several months ago saying, "If there's one thing I tell my generation, it's to live in the present. And this, we're always thinking about what we can do better she said, we could remember what we already have more often. Joining us with some of her wisdom, Samantha Wiggins Harris, student representative of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center.
Good evening. On behalf of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center, we welcome you. The students and staff of the Freedom Center welcome our distinguished guests. Donzella Abernathy, Luci Baines Johnson, Kerry Kennedy, and Peggy Wallace Kennedy. Thank you for being here tonight. We thank the distinguished television and radio journalist Belva Davis for moderating tonight's discussion. And thank you, Isabel Duran, for being tonight's Mistress of Ceremonies. The Freedom Center would not exist without the love and participation of many. First, join me in acknowledging our board of directors. We are grateful to collaborate with Merritt College, our partner in producing the Barbara Lee and L.U. Harris Lecture Series. We also acknowledge our peers, the schools and youth organizations that work hard to assist youth in becoming the women and men we are meant to be. The Freedom Center offers classes based on the words and works of Dr. King and Cesar Chavez. We help students from the 6th grade on to integrate into their own lives, to participate in the community's efforts to solve problems and to organize. We help develop strong warriors who confront racism and the meaninglessness of the addiction to consumerism. We practice peace with justice and study war no more. As our guests will eloquently put forth details of their own lives and offer messages as leaders for peace with justice, we ask each of us to take this directive from Dr. King to heart. He says, make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for civil rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Good for you.
Can you welcome Dawn?
Pardon me?
Dawn, she's supposed to be up.
Yeah, she'll come up. Don't worry about it. Well, if anybody struggles with the present Samantha, it is our next guest. And social justice is not less an issue today than it was 50 years ago. Oakland has survived its own tumultuous times, protests, high crime, economic downturn, and the shooting death of a young man which grabbed national headlines and charges of violation of civil rights, a death that resulted in a critically acclaimed movie. It is in the midst of these challenges that Jean Quan writes about the city's exceptional progress. She says, as a mother, I am committed to building a city where all children are safe and have the opportunity to thrive. That's why, she says, I am working hard to rebuild Oakland's economy, focusing on game-changing projects and creating jobs for residents. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Jean Quan. Now you can come up.
So first of all, the mayor always has to do a few things. I really want to thank the 1,000 people from the Multicultural Association, many of you who have been here tonight. So why don't you just wave, because we Oaklanders want to know you. So for those of you who don't know, I have the honor, distinct privilege of having been both the president of the Oakland School Board in the past and the school board member that represented Title I and a founder of Asian American and ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. So I honor your work, and your work and this lecture series are really doing the same thing. They're talking about a history that sometimes is forgotten or rewritten in a way that doesn't honor the grassroots, the blood and the sweat and the tears of the people who were really the heart of the civil rights movement, whether it was the hospital workers who took the train to Washington and from New York City and raised that money from DC 37, or whether it was the janitors from Chicago, or it was people who had marched all summer long from the streets of Selma. They changed history 50 years ago, and this series talks about that. And when I had the honor of being with Barbara in Washington as a guest of the White House with other mayors to honor those 50 years, we all felt a little older, but in our hearts just as young, I think, but remembering how hard it was and listening to debate, had it all been for naught and we'd not made progress, or were we at that middle level of walking up the stairs and taking a little breather and ready to go on? Well, I think that when you hear these wonderful women, and we will all reflect in our history as daughters and now as mothers, that we'll think about what do we need to pass on to our grandchildren, and particularly those stories. And I feel particularly, I feel like this is a historic moment in America, and how we tell our history will really define our future. I spent this afternoon with about 2,000 Chinese Americans who were protesting a show where Jimmy Kimmel had a 6-year-old, and he asked the 6-year-old, well, how do we pay back the $1.3 trillion that the Chinese have invested in bonds? And the little boy said, well, maybe we should kill them. And he said, that's an interesting idea. And then later asked, well, should we kill them? And, you know, I have to say, as a school board parent, a school board member, and as a parent, that's a teachable moment. And the fact that the ABC and Disney did not use that and even would have a dialogue that was okay for genocide is not acceptable. So it shows us we all have a long ways to go. And this is a teachable moment for America. We can build a city and a country and a nation that has opportunity for everyone, or we can pretend that inequality doesn't exist. And as Martin Luther King always said, and I always say every morning, that there will be no peace without justice, and that when young people have hope, when young people have opportunity, all young people, there will be peace in America, and there'll be peace in the world. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is amazing. Thank you particularly Barbara and Elihu for this series.
Thank you, Mayor Quan. Thank you very much for that rousing participation. Finally, to get to the heart of tonight's event, let me call on your Congresswoman since 1998, a woman whose own path to Capitol Hill is strewn with challenges. In 1963, she was a senior in high school in Southern California. Her drive and desire to exceed stalled, but not stopped by single motherhood. Achieving that college degree nonetheless, her activist roots, perhaps molded in the Black Panther movement, birthed right here in Oakland, where she worked in community projects, and then worked on Bobby Seale's mayoral challenge, which whetted her political appetite as she welded her way through the legislative ranks until one day she found herself the only member of Congress voting against the war in Iraq. These little footnotes and tidbits are part of the history that makes up who and what she is and her fight for equality and social justice. Ladies and gentlemen, Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be home. First, let me just thank Isabel so much for that gracious introduction, but also for your powerful voice in the media, for breaking so many glass ceilings, and for being with us tonight and guiding this historic event. Give Isabel a round of applause. Thank you so much. And of course, tonight we are celebrating, well, really commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement, which brought this country one step closer to achieving liberty and justice for all. Let me thank, first of all, our young people at the Martin Luther King Freedom Center, its staff, board, Samantha, Roy, Karen, who put these lecture series together. They put them together, and I have to share this with you, out of their experiences traveling with me to Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma, Alabama, every year, where we meet the luminaries and the foot soldiers of the movement. We march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with our great warrior, Congressman John Lewis, who on Bloody Sunday was beaten by the Alabama state troopers on this bridge as he and others demanded the right to vote. And I am so proud of these young people because they are excelling in school, and yeah, they're excelling in school. And they're also developing the leadership skills to be our next generation of leaders. I believe that our country and our world is secure because of them. And so again, I just want to salute our young people and thank you. Freedom Center's been in existence since the mid-90s. And let me just say to Mayor Quan, as I said earlier, there is good news in Oakland. There is. And I want to thank you for your tireless work on behalf of this great city. Let me also thank former Mayor, Assemblyman, and Chancellor of the Peralta Community College District, my good friend Elihu Harris, for his tremendous work, even in his retirement. He continues to work to create opportunities for young people to achieve the dream. As we all know, it still has yet to be fulfilled for so many. To the Peralta Community College family, Chancellor Ortiz, to also all of our heads of the colleges, Dr. Norma Ambrose Galaviz, I'm so proud of you, and thank you so much for charting the course for the future for Marriott College. Thank you again for being here and for housing the Martin Luther King Freedom Center in your college. I say that the Peralta District is the most innovative community college in the district, in the country. It really is, and I know that. So let me take a moment of personal privilege to just thank my mother, Mildred Massey, and my sister, Mildred Whitfield, who are with us tonight. I have to just thank them for their support and their love and for keeping it real for me. You know they keep it real. My mom was 89 years old. Mr. Ed Bussey, her friend, my sister Mildred Whitfield, though, they're my love. And I take a moment now to thank all who have worked on this wonderful event, and I especially want to mention Jim Hill and Hill and Company and his team for really their many hours of dedicated work and their passionate work in really communicating to the public the significance of the importance of this event tonight. I'm very pleased that C-SPAN is here with us. This program tonight will be covered, and the voices of these great women will be heard over and over again throughout our country. So thank you again, Jim, and thank you and your team. Now, I have the honor and the privilege to have met these 4 great women during the civil rights pilgrimages and really wanted them to get to know my district, who I always remind folks that you really are the most enlightened, progressive, and diverse congressional district in the country. And I say that over and over and over again. Yes, you are. And so I'm so proud of your activism and really continuing to work for peace and justice. And I wanted you to get to know them, for their stories of their families during the civil rights movement are so powerful. But yet they continue to stay involved and work to complete the unfinished business in the movement, of which there is much. When we look at the increase in poverty, unemployment rates, the lack of investment in public education, the injustices, the supposedly criminal justice system, when we look at the bloated Pentagon budget, when we look at how that budget's taken away the badly needed resources for nation building here at home, when we look at our moral imperative to pass comprehensive immigration reform, there is a lot of work still to do. Lots of work, much work to do. And so tonight we will get a glimpse of their historical past and learn what, as the title of one of Dr. King's I think one of his most profound books, it's called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? Let me take a moment and just say a couple of things about these phenomenal women. You heard their introductions and you have their short bios in the program, but I just have to say a few personal things about them. First, Donzella Abernathy. She is the daughter of the co-founder of the Civil Rights Movement, the Reverend Dr. Ralph Abernathy, and Mrs. Juanita Abernathy. And I just have to say, she's married to Dar Dixon Bizarchi. Now, as a child, Donzella attended all major civil rights marches and was really an active participant in the integration of the public education system in Georgia. She witnessed all of these integral decisions that helped shape laws with the creation of that led to the creation of the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, affirmative action laws, the Public Accommodations Act, and the National Food Stamp Program way back then, which is now unfortunately under attack and is one of her current passions. She has written several books. She has starred in many movies, including Gods and Generals. She wrote Partners to History, Martin Luther King, Dr. Reverend David Abernathy, and the Civil Rights Movement, which was nominated as one of the best books in 2004. Now, her uncle Martin, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., christened her as a baby. And her life has been a true testimony to her embracing the values learned from her father and her mother and Dr. King and his family at her home, which was the gathering place for these great leaders. Donzella is a woman of great conviction, and she uses her creative genius to make this a better world. Now, those old enough may remember 2 teenage girls at the White House during the Johnson administration. So we are so honored tonight to have Luci Baines Johnson with us, who is the youngest daughter of Lady Bird and President Lyndon Baines Johnson, the youngest daughter. I tell you, Luci does so much with her life. She raises funds for the American Heart Association. She's a trustee of Boston University, a member of the advisory board of the Center for Battered Women. She is an amazing woman whose life continues to be about making sure that her father and her mother's vision of a great society, which is her vision, she makes sure that her current work really moves us toward that great society that was the vision of her family. Her spirit and her optimism about the future, really continues to inspire me and those who know and work with her. Now, many in the Bay Area supported Attorney General Robert Bobby Kennedy when he ran for president. Many of you here supported him. And his life was so tragically taken in 1968. He and his wonderful wife, Ethel, presented to the world a family of 11 children. Carrie Kennedy, number 7 of 11, continues her family's legacy, working as a human rights activist since 1981, leading over 40 human rights delegations to over 30 countries through her Robert H. Kennedy Memorial Center for Human Rights, which provides support for the protection of civil rights under the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. She is the author of Speak Truth to Power, Human Rights Defenders Who Are Changing Our World. And let me just tell you, Carrie Kennedy's whole life is about bringing her brilliance and her intellect to bring dignity, democracy, and human rights to people throughout the world. Carrie is a mother of 3 beautiful daughters, and I've come to know Carrie as a relentless, brilliant woman who is really, and I can truly say that she is really changing the world, and I am proud to call her my friend. Peggy Wallace Kennedy exemplifies really the awesome possibilities of transformation and redemption. She is a woman of courage. I met Peggy in Alabama and was so amazed at her early and active support of President Barack Obama. Early support. And standing with Congressman John Lewis to remember Bloody Sunday, where of course her father, George Wallace's state troopers, attacked the voting rights marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now many of you, myself included, remember George Wallace as a staunch segregationist governor who stood in the doorway and tried to block black students from integrating the University of Alabama. Now I met Peggy, I was with Peggy this year when she returned to the University of Alabama and stood where her father, George Wallace, stood in 1963 and spoke of her experience as a child of the movement, which out of this ugly past has given her a clear voice for change and reconciliation that is resounding throughout the country. Throughout the country. And I just have to share this with you. When I was a student at Mills College, I remember getting, and I mentioned this to Peggy earlier, I remember getting very angry when my mentor, the late, our beloved Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, went to visit George Wallace in the hospital after he was shot. She stopped her campaigning for the presidency as the first woman, if you remember, and the first African American to run for the United States office of the president. And incidentally, finally, I got my legislation passed. We'll have a Shirley Chisholm postal stamp next year. Finally. Took a while, but we got that done. But let me tell you, I was so angry at Shirley. Now here I was helping lead her campaign, but Shirley Chisholm taught me so many things, including this lesson. She said, you gotta rise above anger and bitterness to display humanity to one's enemies, she said. And you know what? I kept hearing her say, I didn't believe it. But let me tell you, I believe it because I know Peggy Wallace Kennedy. And I tell you, I believe Shirley Chisholm's visit helped open Governor Wallace's eyes to his terrible racism and hostilities towards African Americans. I believe that, and I have to thank Shirley Chisholm for being so bold and daring as to make that visit. Peggy continues to speak out against racism and injustices and works each and every day to use her life to correct the injustices of the past and for equality and justice for all God's children. She is a woman who I've grown to love dearly. Finally, let me just say, I'd want to say to our moderator, Belva Davis, she really needs no introduction. She doesn't. But Belva is a national treasure, but she's our own. She's the first African-American journalist in Northern California, And in spite of racism and sexism and all of the challenges, she broke so many barriers for so many women. She has won many awards and Emmys, one of which was, and you've seen her interview world leaders, and I was with her when she interviewed Fidel Castro and won an Emmy Award for her film Yankee Comeback, which was televised on Westinghouse Broadcasting in the 70s. And so Belva has always been out there on the cutting edge of the media. And so Belva, I just have to thank you for being here tonight. For those of you who haven't read her book, Never in My Wildest Years, please get a copy because it really gives you a powerful account of her wonderful and her bold life. So let me just close by saying thank you for being here tonight. I have had the privilege to get to know all of these tremendous women, and now I would like for you to get to know them. And I would like to remind us all that we are a region which continues to work on so many fronts to reclaim Dr. King's dream for a world free from racism, poverty, and war. So thank you again tonight. God bless you. Isabel.
This is only a momentary stop because we will hear our first speaker, then we will hear each of these wonderful women individually talk with you, and then we'll have a conversation together. So here we go, Donzella.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to Congresswoman Barbara Lee and to Elihu Harris. This is great. There are some who write history. There are some who make history. There are some who experience history. Martin Luther King said in Birmingham, Alabama, I don't know how many historians we have in the room tonight, but we are certainly making a marvelous chapter for the historians of the future. Well, all of the women that you will meet this evening were making history, experiencing history, and being a part of writing history. So we don't have long to talk. I think it's more important to do show and tell. Could you please put the images there? We are on the screen. So I just want you all to know that the young ladies that will be coming, their fathers are politicians, were politicians. Well, my dad was just a good old Southern Baptist minister. He was a preacher, and here you can see the people before the church, and you can barely see those teeny-weeny little figures there, but that was Daddy and Uncle Martin standing there. And you see, it was the days of segregation, and I don't have long to talk, but I want you to be able to see the colored signs, colored seating. And then on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for being seated where she was supposed to be seated. She was following the law. Here you see her mugshot. And so my dad decided that when Rosa was arrested that he needed to organize, and that's exactly what he did. He organized the first mass meeting. He worked at the local NAACP, and Rosa Parks was the secretary there, and he was the second man in charge under E.D. Nixon. And so he said to E.D. Nixon, do me a favor, call my friend Martin Luther King and invite him to join, and that's exactly what Uncle Martin did. These are the people at First Baptist Church that Carrie Kennedy spoke about earlier. This is my dad's church, and we were so hungry for our freedom because we had endured 244 years of slavery. We'd always been pushed in the back and told that we were less than, told that we were ugly, told that we were dirty, but we knew we were beautiful inside. We just wanted to have that opportunity to show the world. We wanted our equality. This is the earliest picture of Daddy and Uncle Martin, and there they are marching. They're walking to the courthouse because Rosa she's on trial for her arrest on December 5th, and there they are with Bayard Rustin, who came down, and initially the civil rights movement was not going to be nonviolent. It was just going to be a one-day protest, but Bayard came from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and it became a nonviolent protest because he introduced the idea of nonviolence. And there's Uncle Martin in front of the church because he was a minister. That's what they were. And there they are, you know, it started as a one-day boycott, went for 381 days. And here we are, and they are in front of the cars. That's Daddy, Edie Nixon, Uncle Martin, and Rosa, cousin Rosa, that's how we called her. There she is. And I'm doing show and tell, so you all bear with me. That's a colored sign. You young people don't know anything about it, but it was the world that I knew when I was growing up. We couldn't go to the public restaurants, and we couldn't go to the public bathrooms. Everything was separate, and so my mother wouldn't let us go. That's my dad. And Daddy and Uncle Martin were arrested. That's my dad's mug shot. That's Uncle Martin as he was arrested, because Daddy was arrested first and then Uncle Martin, and he said, "Ralph, please come with me." He was too shy. He didn't want to go by himself, so Daddy went with Uncle Martin to be arrested. And there's Uncle Martin as his first mugshot. And that's Joanne Robinson. You know, women don't get the credit, but Joanne Robinson ran the Women's Political Committee, and she organized the women, and they were doing something because Rosa Parks was not the first but the third woman to be arrested. And she decided we were going to have that mass boycott starting December 5th. And there they are at the Highlander Library learning nonviolence. And that white man, that tall white man that you see, that's Pete Seeger. You know, he pinned together those beautiful words we're going to sing later, "We Shall Overcome." And that's Karis Horton, whose father, Miles Horton, ran the Highlander Folk School, where they learned nonviolence. And that's Daddy and Uncle Martin, a trip they made cross-country with Mother and Aunt Coretta, and they're seated at the table. That's the way I knew them, so bear with me. This is a personal story that turned into a public story. And there we're walking, you know, saying we shall overcome. Freedom and justice and liberty for everyone. There they are on the bus, and that white man that you see right there, that's Glenn Smiley. He's the man who taught Daddy and Uncle Martin the principles of nonviolence. And I want you to know that he did it. Bayard came down, but Bayard left, but Glenn was the one who taught. And whenever people see Uncle Martin with a white man, know that that white man was Glenn Smiley. And here they are again on that bus after that successful 381-day boycott. That's my parents' home that was bombed. And Mark Kennedy, the husband of Peggy Wallace Kennedy, they were telling me about this place, my home, that has become this museum, this birth home. When my mother was pregnant with me that evening, she got up. She said an angel awakened her, and she left the living room and went into the bedroom, and 15 minutes later, the bomb exploded. When I would be born that August, I would come out of my mother's womb shaking, and invariably when I'm in a stressful situation, my hands start to quiver and shake, and there's nothing I can do. It's the trauma that we carry with us from those situations. That's the house again. They bombed our homes, they bombed our churches. That night they bombed 5 places. Our home, my dad's church, First Baptist, they bombed the home of Reverend Robert Gratz, a white minister for being a white minister with a black congregation, Bell Street in Mount Olive. Hatred was rampant. And at that point, George Wallace hadn't become our governor yet, it was Governor Patterson. Anyway, there they are. That was a march on Washington that they tried to have prior to. Daddy and Uncle Martin. I've got to go fast so you all can just see. Did you see that back there? They said race mixing is communist. They wanted us to stop. But here they are, the young guys. There was determination. And then there was a deranged black woman who stabbed Uncle Martin with a letter opener. He used to tell us all about it when we were little, and he said that he survived. And because he survived that letter opener, I knew he would survive that shot in Memphis. But little did I know. There they are. They were just Negro leaders. There they are, the way I knew them. Uncle Martin was always asking Daddy. Daddy was a strategist. This is just show and tell, and that was the hatred that was trying to stop us. Why were they burning a cross? My God, the cross. It's a symbol of love, and how it turned to a symbol of hate, I do not know. I don't know what Nathan Bedford Forrest was thinking, but they got it wrong. They got it wrong. And here you see a black woman being beaten, and there's a purse on the ground. This is Montgomery, Alabama. This was the time that I grew up. This is a world that I knew. You see they're grabbing her by her ankles upside down. This is a Freedom Riders, 1961. This is in Anniston, Alabama, when they set the bus on fire because black and white people wanted to ride together. And Carrie, it was your father who was saying that we needed to test the transportation interstate transportation, your father. And when they were trapped in the church, Daddy and Uncle Martin were on the phone, and it was with your father, and your father decided to send in the National Guard. This is a story I'll never forget. You see, they came and stayed at my home, and I saw all those people. Anyway, that's Jim Swerg and John Lewis. They were beaten unmercifully in Montgomery, Alabama. That's Jim Swerg in the hospital. That's my dad that night at the church. These are the people that were sleeping in the church, my dad's church, First Baptist Church. You see them on the pews. They were afraid to go outside because the KKK was going to kill them. And then the National Guard that Bobby Kennedy sent in, there they are. Anyway, that's the press conference they had the following morning in my mother's house, and I was a little girl witnessing that. That's John Lewis, Uncle Martin, Daddy, and James Foreman from CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And that's, you can see the patch on John Lewis's head from where he was beaten. And then there were the police who were angry about the buses, the white, the colored, and finally the National Guard. The Freedom Riders, Uncle Martin in our house, and that's me, that little girl sitting on Uncle Martin's lap, and Mother and Aunt Coretta, and me and my sister and Aunt Coretta, and then Uncle Martin and Marty and Yoki, and then the KKK that tried to stop them, and there they are. This is Anniston, Alabama, and there they are getting arrested, and there they are in jail. You know, my dad went to jail 44 times, Uncle Martin went to jail 13 times, and they weren't in there for being drunk or beating their wives. They were in there for demanding liberty and justice for all of us. That's Jackie Robinson, who came and used his celebrity for good and got involved in the community. There he is again in the church with Daddy and Uncle Martin. There they are, suited up, looking like perfect gentlemen. Nobody had to tell them to pull up their pants. Nobody had to tell them how to make their verbs and their nouns agree. They prided themselves in the way they presented themselves. Here we couldn't go to swim. And here's Peggy's father. She's going to tell you this story, but you need to see it because I'm just giving you a picture of history. That's he's standing there at the door of the University of Alabama, and Peggy's going to tell us all about it. There he is again with Katzenbach, yes. And there's Vivian Malone, who's getting ready to make her entry into the University of Alabama. Fred Shuttlesworth, Daddy, and Uncle Martin. There they are getting ready to go to jail because we couldn't shop into the department store. You know, at Easter time, we couldn't try on the clothes. So we needed to boycott the stores. That march was a Good Friday march. There they are, Fred Shuttlesworth. There they are. The overview. Then they're being arrested. They were pulled and thrown into the paddy wagon. Separated, left to grieve. Uncle Martin wrote the letter from Birmingham jail on toilet paper. That's Mother and Aunt Coretta visiting them. That's them leaving jail, and after that, Uncle Martin had written the letter from the Birmingham jail. And the young people were all stirred up. They turned the dogs on us. Come on. Little children were arrested, demanding freedom. Then they turned the water hoses on us. I think I should let you just pictures stay for them, speak for themselves. It's better show and tell that kind of way. I don't want anybody to forget what happened here. I don't want anybody to sugarcoat it. It's the reality of the world that I knew growing up. Too many people suffered for us to have our rights for freedom. So that's Daddy and Uncle Martin continuing. That's Birmingham. And they're there at their hotel. When they would leave that hotel room, they bombed it, set off a bomb, and they had just been out of the hotel room less than 10 minutes. There they are with President Kennedy, and there was a delegation of Negro leaders, and all the way in the extreme left, you'll be able to see Medgar Evers. And then there's Daddy at the White House making the comment afterwards. That's the telegram where he thanks the president for inviting them to the White House. And then right after that, they killed Medgar Evers, Mrs. Evers. She made the cover of the Life magazine. And then there was the March on Washington. I'll never forget being a child at the March on Washington, sitting there on the steps, as Uncle Martin said, "I have a dream." And when he said, my 4 little children, my sister and I jumped up and down screaming. Yoki wasn't there that day. Marty and Dexter weren't there that day, but I was there with my sister. It was a great moment. And there were the movie stars, and that's when I saw the movie stars, that's when I knew that's what I wanted them. I wanted to be like them, because they could get up and walk away from the violence. Nobody was calling their house every single night trying to threaten them like they were at our house. That's Daddy speaking there. Those are the people. That's Uncle Martin. And right there is my mother in those glasses, seated next to Aunt Coretta and Aunt Mahalia behind Whitney Young. And Rosa. And those are the people. Oh. And they stood in the shadow of our president. And then our president met them and talked to them. Oh, and there he is with Adelaide Stevenson. And right after that, on September 15th, 5 girls went to the bathroom, not 4. My friend Sarah Collins, who is my partner in a movie that we're writing right now. Sarah was 12 years old. Her sister Addie Mae was 14. Their friend Denise McNair was 11. Carol Robinson and Cynthia Wesley, they all went to the bathroom. It was Children's Day. It was the first time the children were ever going to take over the church. They were all wearing white, and they were in the bathroom. They were primping. Sarah went into the stall. Denise said to Addie Mae, "Will you tie my sash?" As she got ready to tie the sash, they heard an explosion, and in came shards of glass. The girls were killed. Sarah was the only one left standing. She said God left her standing for a reason. I just want you to see. There they are. Because they died, that's my friend Sarah who survived. You know, everybody gives the girls and remembers the girls, but nobody remembers my friend Sarah. I want you to remember Sarah. Sarah's sacrifice, and Sarah's a maid today. She lives the reality of the movie The Help. There she is today. She lost one eye, and most of the vision in her other eye, and her forehead is bumpy because shards of glass still line her forehead. And then on November 22nd, hatred again struck, and they killed our president. I like to show this picture because I always used to think that J. Edgar Hoover was responsible. And that's Bobby Kennedy there. You know, because they used to bug our home. And then our new president came to be, and there he is signing the Civil Rights Bill. And Luci will come and tell us all about it. And that's Hubert Horatio Humphrey, our vice president. And that's me, that little girl who refused to go to the bathroom because the bomb had gone off. And I could no longer go to the bathroom anymore in a public area. That's a trauma. And the movie stars that came and helped. And there's Daddy and Malcolm and Uncle Martin. And then right after that, they killed the 3 civil rights workers in Neshoba County, Mississippi, just because they were trying to register people to vote. And that Cecil Price right there, that deputy, he was responsible for killing those boys. And that's Daddy and Uncle Martin in their Blues Brothers sunglasses talking to him. And then Uncle Martin got the Nobel Prize. They went to see the Pope. They went to Berlin. And then we couldn't go to the ocean. You all take for granted here in California. I was like 12 years old before I finally set my feet in the Atlantic Ocean. Couldn't swim in the swimming pools. And there they go to jail again. And Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed for a night march. And because he was killed, they decided to have a march. And that's exactly what they did. Jose Williams and John Lewis. And as they crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by angry policemen. And you can see how they're being trampled. I don't want to tell you about it. I want you to see what happened. They met them on horseback. It was devastating. So Daddy and Uncle Martin came together and tried to figure out what to do. That night they killed Reverend James Reeb as well, a white minister, for being involved. They're marching again. That's for Reverend James Reeb, an Episcopal priest, and that's Daddy and Uncle Martin. My dad's praying. And then they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge a second time. They weren't allowed. They trampled the young white children and the young white students. Here we finally got that chance to march. It was incredible, 55 miles from Selma to Montgomery. But there were people that were angry and hateful. And I was there along that march. That's me, that little girl in that striped sweater with my brother, my sister, and my mother and dad. They gave us a salt tablet. That's my mother, who's the only person alive from the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. That's me again, the little girl in the striped sweater singing. And that's me that evening, that kiss, we were waiting to get our kiss from Uncle Sammy. The movie stars came. The first time I ever heard about I Left My Heart in San Francisco, Tony Bennett sang it that night. There he is. And there I am standing on stage with Uncle Martin, thanking all the movie stars and everybody for being a part of what was happening. Uncle Retta's thanking them. And then it's the following morning, that's me standing there with the little rain cap, my hand in my mouth, and we're all lining up, getting ready to march. And there we start the march. We're waiting for Uncle Martin to come, and he finally comes, and we start marching. It's the second line. And that's for the right to vote. Just for the right to vote. While we're having this fantastic march, and we're in the rally there, and there, right there, is the governor's mansion, the Capitol, and behind George Wallace is there, inside, Peggy's father peeking out the window, according to my dad. Anyway, hatred was just down the road. Just down the road, down Highway 80, and there was this beautiful white woman named Viola Gregg Lauza. There she is. She took this black man and she had him in the front seat of her car. Leroy Moulton, they got angry that she had him. So they drove up beside her, they took their pistols and they shot into the car. And her brain splattered all over Leroy Moulton. They came back to make sure that was a good kill, and when they thought that everybody else was dead, they went on down the road. That white woman died for us to have the right to vote. Not only did black people suffer, but white people suffered because we were trying to make America live up to the principles for which this country was founded. That's Uncle Martin and President Johnson. And that's Daddy. And there, you'll be able to see, is that you, Lucy, that little girl right there? That's Lucy. You see her standing behind her father's head as he's signing the Voting Rights Act. And Daddy and Uncle Martin are waiting. And that young woman all the way to the right is Vivian Malone, who Peggy's father was trying to stop from integrating the University of Alabama. And then they shook hands, and it was done. And we got the right to vote. And that's Bobby. And right after that, we had to integrate the schools. And when I went to elementary school, there were the angry press and people, and there I am, that little girl all the way in the corner with the books. That's Uncle Martin being cool. And with Stokely Carmack, this is the James Meredith March in Mississippi. And there we are, we went to Memphis. And there they are getting off the plane. They found they couldn't have that march. There was an injunction for them not to march. I can't tell you the story. Anyway, there they are on the balcony. They go into the hotel room. That's that night before. They speak. Uncle Martin speaks. That's the briefcase. And then he was shot. And how it all happened was real simple. You know, he went out on the balcony, he was getting ready to go, and Daddy walked past him, and he said, "Oh, you smell good. Oh, I forgot to put on my cologne." So my daddy went inside to put on his Aramis cologne, and so Uncle Martin was standing there on the balcony. Somebody said, "Dr. King is cool, you gotta have a jacket." And then, as my dad got ready to put the Aramis cologne in his cheek, he heard something that sounded like a firecracker, and he looked, and there was Uncle Martin laid out, and all he could do, you see, was his feet. So Daddy ran to him, and his eyes were wobbly, and he tried to move his lips, and nothing would come out. They got to the hospital, they cut him open, and they found a big gaping hole in his chest. And the doctor said to him, "If you want to have these final moments with him, you can." And so Daddy went over to him, took him up in his arms, and his breathing got less and less and less, and then he was gone. And like Abraham Lincoln, my dad used to say, now he belongs to the ages. Now we have a Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Freedom. Fast. Teddy Kennedy came. And that's Bobby Kennedy and Ethel Kennedy in front of the house with Dexter and Dora McDonald, Carrie's mother and father. She looks a lot like her mom. There they are meeting with Aunt Coretta. This is the night before the funeral. And then Mrs. Kennedy came. I'll never forget that morning. We got the opportunity to meet her. She was beautiful. She spoke in the most beautiful voice. There she is with Aunt Coretta. And as we get ready to go, that's my sister with the little white thing in her hair. As we get ready to go to the funeral, Hubert Humphrey, Daddy overseeing the funeral. That's Bobby Kennedy and Ethel all the way down in the front. It's Uncle Sammy who came with Eartha Kitt and all the people. And that's me, that little girl in the white dress with the arrow, and my head is down because I was hurt that God had killed him. I didn't understand, and Daddy's giving the last rites. And where he is buried today, my dad paid for it to be buried there. Granddaddy King said Ebenezer wasn't going to let it happen, and he said, Ralph, help me. And so my dad gave him the money to where Uncle Martin is buried today. And then we carried on with the Poor People's Campaign. It was No More Hunger. And there they're asking for the food stamp program. And it was about peace. And that was my dad's friend, Cesar Chavez, who came and let's work together to change this nation. And Teddy Kennedy, and the proclamation issuing the holiday that my dad wanted to happen. And there he is with Cesar Chavez and Wounded Knee. And that's me and my dad, and that's his funeral when I said goodbye to him. And that's Bobby, that's your brother. He came to be with us and spent 2 days in Atlanta. And that's a book that I wrote because that's all I could do is tell their story. It's my dad, that's my mother, the only person left alive, and it's for Uncle Martin that we tell this story. Thank you.
I don't have the words to express our collective thank you for not only informing us, but in doing it in such a way that we felt the emotions of the moment. So thank you so very, very much. Now, I'm supposed to be the moderator here tonight, but history will drive this program because we have an opportunity that few people, nobody has had this group of women with the amount of history that they carry to be presented to them in one evening. So I will do my best. I will listen with you and I will applaud with you. But I hope that you are in the mood to be educated on a first-hand basis. So I will ask our next speaker, Luci Baines Johnson, to come and share her family's history, America's history, with us.
Thank you, Isabel. As Lyndon Johnson's daughter, I've had the blessing of being an eyewitness to history on many occasions. But none more precious than holding the hand of my hero, Congressman John Lewis, as we marched with Vice President Biden, members of Congress, and civil rights heroes across the Pettus Bridge in Selma. We were part of a great pilgrimage of faith and politics, retracing the historic events of the civil rights movement 50 years ago. With tears running down my cheeks and memories flooding my heart, I thank God for the sacrifices of those who had fought and died for freedom and recommitted myself to continuing the fight for social justice. Thank you, Congresswoman Lee, for taking a new generations of students to this great civil rights pilgrimage, and for joining Mayor Harris, the Martin Luther King Freedom Center, and Merritt College in sharing the extraordinary lessons we learned there. Tonight's program will shed light on the civil rights journey, but it will also be a healing force for those of us whose fathers played pivotal roles in such important times. Congresswoman Lee, through your generosity, I've come to know better and love more Donzella Abernathy, Kerry Kennedy, Peggy Wallace Kennedy. Ours is a very precious union, for we have shared these best of times and worst of times, and our lives are forever changed because of them. 41 years ago, my father made his final public address at the first Civil Rights Symposium in the Presidential Library that bears his name. All who were there will never forget watching a very ill and a very old-looking Lyndon Johnson make his last impassioned plea for civil rights. He was just 64, 2 years younger than I am today. In the middle of his speech, Daddy took a nitroglycerin pill, and I rushed to be near him afterwards. He explained that an angina attack had kept him up all night, and his doctor had admonished him that if he made that speech, he could not guarantee that he'd walk off the stage alive. I asked my father why on earth had he come under those circumstances, and Daddy shook his head in bewilderment that his own child didn't get the obvious lesson, and said, "Because, my child, if I had died, I would have gone dying for what I lived for. What more could any man want?" Less than 6 weeks later, Daddy was dead. He had gone dying for what he lived for. My father's civil rights record is very public. The Civil Rights Bill of 1964 ending legal segregation in our public places, restaurants, motels, transportation. The Voting Rights Bill of 1965 ensuring people of every color the right to vote. The 1965 Fair Housing Act ensuring the right to buy a home in any neighborhood, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity. And the 1968 Immigration Act ending ethnic and racial immigration quotas. Historians will tell the public story. Tonight I want to share our family's very personal story. Our civil rights journey was also very personal. Daddy's first experience with racial discrimination began when he taught in a Mexican school in order to put himself through college. Bored, his students often fought at recess as they were denied any playground equipment by an impoverished and indifferent school district. Desperate to help them, my father spent some of his own limited resources on bats and balls for the kids. He found his payoff in happier children at recess and ones more ready to learn when they returned to the classroom. I'll never forget hearing of this story in a joint session of Congress in 1964. He told the world that never in his fondest dreams did he think he would have the chance to help the sons and daughters of the poor students that he had taught. But ladies and gentlemen, I have that chance now, and I aim to do something about it. And do something we did. As a young girl, I remember driving from Texas to Washington, D.C. with my mother and witnessing our housekeeper, Patsy, being denied entrance to a motel simply because she was black. My mother was incensed and hurt, and we drove on. One year, we forgot to make arrangements for our dog Beagle to fly home with us to Texas. Desperate for a solution, Daddy decided Jean, a wonderfully accommodating employee, would take Beagle with him in our car. Jean's response stunned us. For the first time ever, Jean said, "No, sir, I can't. It is going to be hard enough for me, a black man, to drive this fancy car across the South with all that fancy stuff of yours in it, but there isn't any way I, a black man, can take this car, this stuff, and a dog." These personal experiences played a powerful role in my father's commitment to see justice done for Patsy, Jean, the South Texas children he had taught, and all the countless others like them who were excluded from basic civil rights. Because you see, to us, they all had faces. The great moments of the civil rights are all intertwined in the great moments in our family's life. The Public Accommodation Act was signed on my 17th birthday, and no one will ever receive a more precious birthday present. On the day that the 1965 Voting Rights Act was signed, as Donzella just showed you, I was on daddy duty, which meant I would go with my father to the ceremony. I remember asking my daddy, "Why are we going to the Capitol?" Probably because I saw the White House as taking less time from my busy adolescent schedule. His response was of a disappointed teacher who couldn't understand why his own daughter didn't get the obvious lesson. "Luci Baines, we are going to the Capitol because there are many brave men and women who won't be coming back to this Congress because of the stand they have taken today. And because there are many great men and women who will be coming to the Congress who never could have come except for this Congress's courageous vote, like your own great Congresswoman from this district. We need to thank these heroes in the halls of Congress that they have served so heroically." Standing beside leaders of Congress and members of the Civil Rights Movement, I watched in awe as my father used many pens to sign the great legislation into law and gave them to the heroes of the day. On the way home, I asked Daddy, "With all the great civil rights leaders there, why on earth did you give the first pen to the Republican leader, Senator Dirksen?" I was only called Luci Baines when I was found wanting. And once more he shook his head and said, "Luci Baines, I didn't have to convert one of those great civil rights leaders for this legislation. They were already for it." But without Senator Dirksen's support, those civil rights leaders and I would just have had a bill. Because of Everett Dirksen, we have a law. He deserved the pen, and I wanted the world to know it. I grew up in an area of Washington fondly called Hanukkah Heights because it was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. We lived there because my father found the restrictive real estate covenants in other areas of Washington, D.C. morally repugnant. One of my closest friends was the first Jew allowed to break the restricted covenant in the D.C. area of Spring Valley. The Fair Housing Bill made it possible for others to do so everywhere. It was all so very personal. I will always be grateful that a courageous young Texas Congressman, George Herbert Walker Bush, cast his vote for important civil rights legislation. It was a time of bipartisanship for public good that we can all be proud of. That spirit is needed now more than ever. It seems only right to conclude this sentimental family journey with a story my father told me at the end of the Civil Rights Symposium in 1972. A little old lady from the Temperance Union approached Prime Minister Winston Churchill after the war, accusing him of drinking enough alcohol during the war to fill an entire room up to here. Chastising him for his example and challenging him to reform, Churchill looked on with a certain amount of satisfaction and amusement. And instead of raising his temper, he was reported to have replied, "My dear, dear lady, so little have I done, so much I have yet to do." Then Daddy went on to say, "Let no one delude himself that our work is done. We have proved that great progress is possible. We know how much still remains to be done. And if our efforts continue, and if our will is strong, and if our hearts are right, and if courage remains our constant companion, then, my fellow Americans, I am confident we shall overcome." This past summer, the United States Supreme Court struck down the protection of Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. I cried. I knew states who had passed voter ID laws would make it harder for the poor and the elderly to vote because their access to government-issued IDs is impeded by their circumstances. You don't have a driver's license if you're too poor to have a car, or too old, or too isolated. The record of fraud that these laws were designed to prevent does not exist. And now, I desperately fear neither will the record of our most vulnerable voting unless, of course, we all come to their aid. Great progress has been made in the last 50 years, but our work is unfinished. For until there is equality in our schools, until there is equality in our justice system, until there is equality in our purchasing power, and until there is equality in our health care, emancipation will only be a proclamation, but not a fact. I have 13 grandchildren. I want theirs to be a more just generation. And I believe, as my father did, that with our continued commitment to social justice for all, we shall one day overcome. Thank you.
Well, I tell you, you are really in for a special treat. With the quality, with the information, with the personal views of the women who've joined us tonight. And it's my pleasure now to invite to the microphone Carrie Kennedy, who will be our next speaker. And if we have time, we'll have a discussion afterwards.
Well, thank you so much. I am just so happy to be here with all of you this evening, and especially with Barbara Lee, who is one of my personal heroes. We are so blessed to have you in our midst and as our leader and in Washington, and now as President Obama's special representative to the United Nations. Thank you, Barbara Lee, for all you do. And so it's such a privilege for me to be here with Donzaleigh and Luci and Peggy and Belva. Thank you so much for overseeing us and keeping us together tonight. I'm, as you heard from Barbara, I am the seventh child of 11. My father was the seventh child, so I'm the seventh of the seventh. Very, very lucky. People, you know, as you heard, I work in international human rights. People ask how I became involved in human rights. And, well, if you have 7 brothers, you appreciate human rights at a very young age. My earliest memories are when my father was the Attorney General at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, and my mother really did not, my parents really didn't separate their home life from their work life. So my mother would take 6 or 7 of us and a couple of dogs and a football and bring us down to the Justice Department, and we would run around and see my dad. And then our favorite thing to do was to go in the tunnel underneath the Justice Department over to the FBI building to watch the sharpshooters at practice. Now, the head of the FBI at that time was J. Edgar Hoover, and he was a man not known for his love of children or his sense of humor. And now, this is the weird part about this story, which is that in the bottom of the FBI building, there was a suggestion box. How about that? Anyway, one day, my mother took out her telltale red pen and wrote a suggestion, put that into the box. And then as she was gathering up the kids and the football and the dogs and bringing us back to my father's office, which took her a few minutes, a very astute FBI agent went and took that suggestion out of the box and brought it up to J. Edgar Hoover, who read it and then had it immediately sent to Daddy. And so when we were walking back into Daddy's office, he was opening the suggestion, and the suggestion was, get a new director. So this was an important lesson at a very young age in the importance of speaking truth to power. On another visit to Daddy's office, he wrote me a letter, and I still have that letter on my wall at my home, and it says, "Dear Carrie, today was a historic day, not only because of your visit, but because 2 African Americans were allowed to register at the University of Alabama over the objections of the governor. It happened just a few moments ago, and I hope these events are long past by the time you get your pretty little head to college. Love and kisses, Daddy." Well, there are a lot of changes that happened from the time he wrote that letter till the time I got to college, and from then until today. But still, not enough has changed. Our schools are desegregated, but only 10% of the bachelor's degrees earned each year go to Black Americans. Our racist literacy tests have been banned from polling places, but African Americans wait online at polls twice as long as white Americans, an average of 23 minutes to vote compared to 12 minutes for whites. Our on-the-books employment discrimination laws have been struck down, but only 6 Fortune 500 companies have CEOs who are Black. And in the previous census, a Black child in America today is 3 times more likely than a white child to grow up in poverty. These realities are unacceptable. They are an affront to America, but they are also no mystery. In many ways, we've replaced upfront, deliberate discrimination with unspoken structural discrimination. The Voting Rights Act, the crown jewel of the American Civil Rights Movement, is under attack in states from North Carolina to Texas since the Supreme Court gutted the Section 4 formula in June. Florida's Stand Your Ground laws have already been used to excuse the unprovoked slaughter of an African-American child once this year. And this week, in one of Detroit's infamously segregated suburbs, an African-American teen, Renisha McBride, knocked on a door for help after her car broke down and was shot in the face and killed by a white homeowner mistaken for an intruder. She was 19 years old, alone in a new neighborhood, and scared. Our prison laws disproportionately target and incarcerate people of color. African Americans are 21% more likely to receive mandatory minimum sentences than white defendants, and 20% more likely to be sentenced to prison. Even the U.S. Sentencing Commission found that Black offenders receive sentences that are 10% longer than white offenders for the same crimes. Today, the statistics for Hispanic Americans and other families of color continue these trends. Each one of these statistics represents a family disrupted, a child raised with less than what we owe the next generation. Today, these structural obstacles to opportunity are just as real as the deliberate obstacles that my father dedicated his career to eliminating so many years ago. Now, when you think about all of these statistics, it's easy to grow cynical and to retreat into our own contained and demanding worlds of family and work and the other problems that confront us. But I'd like to share with you a story that happened to me. When I was 21 years old, I took a summer internship at Amnesty International in Washington, D.C., and I spent that time documenting abuses committed by U.S. immigration officials against refugees from El Salvador. And I was horrified to learn that my country was treating the most destitute with such disdain. But I also learned about refuseniks in Russia and anti-apartheid activists in South Africa and the mothers of the disappeared in El Salvador. And I learned that there was a whole world out there of activists who were trying to create change in their countries. The cause was compelling, the enemy was dangerous and powerful, but I found that I was surrounded by Davids who, with little more than the slingshots of their heart and nerve and sinew to support them, stood up against a world full of Goliaths. And if you look back at the changes that have been made around the world over the last 30 years, it looks like the angels prevailed. So when I started working in 1981, all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships. Today, there's not a right-wing military dictatorship left standing. All of Eastern Europe was under communist leaders. Today, there's not a communist government in Eastern Europe. South Africa was at the height of apartheid. Today, South Africa is at a series of freely elected governments elected by a majority of their people. And women's rights was not on the international agenda. In fact, it wasn't until Hillary Clinton went to China in 1995 and declared women's rights are human rights, which was revolutionary at the time, that women's rights got on the international agenda. And since then, CEDAW, which is the Women's Rights Convention at the United Nations, has been ratified by 183 different countries. Now, how did those changes take place? None of those changes took place because governments wanted them to. In fact, governments tried to stop them. And they didn't take place because armies wanted them to. In fact, great armies tried to stop them. And they didn't take place because huge multinational corporations wanted them to. In fact, multinational corporations wanted to stop them. They took place because small groups of determined people, as Margaret Mead said, harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true. And they band together and they said, what's going on is wrong and we're going to create change. So I just want to leave you with this. We're here tonight listening to these incredible stories of the civil rights movement. And that's important because it's part of our history. But it's really part of our present and part of our future. And what we need to learn tonight is how you create change. How do you create structural change in our community, in our country, and our world? And that's the lessons we all have to walk out of here with. That each of us has a role to play. That each of us can work together to create change. And that's how our world is going to get better. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Very few people on this planet have witnessed Peggy Wallace Kennedy's story, because she has just decided to tell it just a few years ago. She symbolizes where we are today, where there's movement on a personal basis for people to improve life. So we invite her now to share her story with you.
Thank you so much. My name is Peggy Wallace Kennedy. and I am a daughter of the movement. And while my life's journey has been very different in many aspects than those of Luci, Donzaleigh, and Carrie, I come here to share my own life's experience as a testament to change and reconciliation as we face another civil rights struggle in America in my lifetime. I was born in 1950 in the small rural town of Clayton, Alabama, to George and Lurleen Wallace, at a time when racial segregation was a cultural norm throughout the South. I was 13 years old when my father proclaimed segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever in his inaugural address in January of 1963 after being sworn in as governor of Alabama. Those 6 words would become a permanent commentary on the character of Governor George Wallace and an inescapable burden for his children. On June 11th, 1963, less than 5 months after he became governor, my father journeyed back to his alma mater, the University of Alabama, to stand in the schoolhouse door to prevent the enrollment of 2 African Americans, James Hood and Vivian Malone. It would yet become another defining moment in the character of George Wallace. My memories of June 11th, 1963 were very different from what anyone could imagine. For just as it was a day that changed the lives of Vivian Malone, James Hood, and those that would follow in their footsteps, it changed mine as well, but in a different way. I was with my mother at a wood frame cabin set deep in a slough of Lake Martin, Alabama, a place that offered Lurleen Wallace comfort of how her life used to be alongside a rutted dirt road deep in the heart of Tuscaloosa County, simple, unobstructed, and safe, a sense of peace that comes with escape. My feet dangle from the wooden seat of a makeshift swing laying low under the bough of an old oak tree. There was an unseen intruder on that day, a taut wire that seemed to tug my mother up and down a small wooden pier jutting into the water, pulling one hand through her coarse mane of thick brown hair while coursing a cigarette in the other. Her security detail of one had grown to a cadre of uniformed state troopers. She stood alone and bereft. Where had I heard this wind before, changed like this to a deeper roar? What would it take my standing there for, holding open a restive door, looking downhill to a frothy shore? Summer was past and the day was past. Somber clouds in the west were massed. It was the day that my father stood in the schoolhouse door. I was 13 years old. My mother was 36. That day was the end of Lurleen Wallace's hope for a simpler life, for it was the beginning of our living beneath the shadow of the schoolhouse door. How could my mother have known that in less than 3 years she would become governor of Alabama, the 6th most admired woman in the world, and in less than 5 years she would be dead, known by the world and loved by thousands? The images captured on June 11, 1963 in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, will forever remind us of the confrontation between George Wallace and Nicholas Katzenbach, and the grace that Vivian Malone and James Hood demonstrated as they walked among angry crowds. But there are no photographs of a 13-year-old girl sitting on a swing under an old oak tree, watching her mother standing alone under the blaze of a summer sun. From that moment on, and for many years to come thereafter, my life, my politics, and my spirit were measured by that of my father as a mere reflection of Governor George C. Wallace. In 1972, my father was paralyzed in an assassination attempt in Laurel, Maryland. From that day on, he began his own journey on the road to Jericho. As the world focused on the events of May 15, 1972, and as he lay near death at Holy Cross Hospital, I witnessed the power of forgiveness in the eyes of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm and Ethel Kennedy as they stood by his bed and offered prayers of hope for his life. It was a lesson to me about the rising above of the human spirit, a moment that would one day inspire me to rise, to stand, and to find that promise of forgiveness in my heart. History tells of my father's journey to understanding through suffering as a result of his paralysis, of his deep sense of caring for people, for his acts of kindness to the downtrodden, and his changed heart. At the time of his death, he was beloved by legions of both whites and African Americans, and still today, as I travel through Alabama, I'm always reminded of the love and admiration for the life of Governor Wallace. But still, there will always be the asterisk of the defiant George Wallace of the 1960s that will forever define and denote the character of my father. As I grew older and married and had children, I began to see myself separate and apart with a worldview of my own. In 1996, my husband and I took our then 8-year-old son, Burns, to Atlanta to visit the Martin Luther King National Historic Site. The museum chronicled the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King, including his fight for freedom in Alabama. As we moved through the exhibits, we turned a corner only to face the visual images of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, fire hoses in Birmingham, and a defiant George Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door. Burns stood silent for a long pause, and a look of sadness came over his face. He turned to me and asked, "Why did Pawpaw do those things to other people?" I realized that at that moment I was at a crossroad in my life and the life of my son. It was the first step in my journey of building a legacy of my own. I knelt down beside my son. I drew him close and said, "Pawpaw never told me why he did those things, but I know that he was wrong. So maybe it would just have to be up to me and you to help make things right." Being here with you is yet another stop on my own personal journey to raise the call for justice in our lifetime. Today is yet another day of the fulfillment of the promise that I made to my 2 sons. Today and all the tomorrows to come are opportunities for me to lay yet another stone on a legacy of my own. For most of my life, I lived in the shadow of history. My life was measured by the accomplishments of others. I was the daughter, then wife, of powerful men. My life was measured by their success and not by my own. And then I came to understand the inherent power in each of us and the opportunity for change that my life story could bring to daughters and wives when they can see themselves separate and apart and be able to stand and speak because their life has worth and their voices can count for justice, for mercy, and change in their lifetime. Let us be judged each as one. Let us break the shackles of the past. Let us live extraordinary lives measured not by where we came from, but where we're going. And let us step from the shadows of self-doubt. Each one of us has the power to change first our own lives and then the lives of others. For years I wandered in a life of indifference, always supporting but never leading, always learning but never teaching, always loving others but never loving myself, always believing in others but never in me, always in the crowd but never breaking away, believing that my life would be measured by the accomplishments of others but never by my own. But today I stand before you as myself. And I ask you to proclaim a victory for yourself and to stand and speak with your own voice and love with your own heart, to believe that you have the power to change your world. Rise to proclaim that for too many Americans, the schoolhouse door of opportunity, equality, and freedom remains closed. Rise to condemn the politics of exclusion that runs rampant in America. For America is at her best when she embraces all of us. Protects the least of us and offers her bounty of hope and prosperity to not just some of us. Rise not just to remember how far we have come, but to commit to the struggle that lies ahead. There may be no more stands in the schoolhouse door, but the underbelly of discrimination still lies like a pall over America. Rise to ask each other to stand in the schoolhouse door every day, to encourage a child, to comfort a parent, to speak, to walk, and to pray for justice for all in our country in our lifetime. And rise to be better, not bitter. Stand your ground. Reach for a higher star. Stand firm when all others fade away. Be courageous and proclaim a victory of your own. Rise up for yourself and for your dignity, so that one day your children and your grandchildren can say that your life had not been lived in vain. Thank you.